Let's go to London and speak to Nabila Ramdani, who's a French-Algerian journalist and columnist. Nabila, thank you so much indeed for joining us. You know, you're speaking to us from the UK, which is also holding a general election. There are certain restrictions about what we're allowed to talk about because we're an international broadcaster. We may be being watched in the UK and Algeria right now. So let's be a little bit careful and stick to facts rather than opinion about the political parties. First of all, your personal opinion about the immediate future for Algeria now that Abdelaziz Bouteflika has gone and this election is being held.
Well, first of all, it has to be said that the election is indeed going ahead in spite of ongoing protests calling for the vote to actually be cancelled. Remember that the transitional government in Algiers has already abandoned planned polls twice this year, once in April and again in July. But the army, which is now the main political player in politics, insisted that the election goes ahead. And specifically, it's the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, Ahmed Ghaid Saleh, who is the most powerful figure in Algeria at the moment, who views the elections or the election of a new president as the best way to draw a line under a year of chaos. And of course, demonstrators and protesters view, and indeed activists who have opposed these elections view things quite differently. They're actually still taking to the streets to demand a complete overhaul of the political system. And they are calling these elections a masquerade, and they're still calling for freedom, and they are effectively chanting on the streets as we speak that they will not vote. And in fact, this has already translated in a very low turnout among expatriates around the world who started voting earlier in the week. What Algerians effectively want is to curb the president's power, which have extended to every sphere of society under Bouteflika's 20-year rule. And they're also calling for a national dialogue conference in which citizens will be able to assemble and indeed discuss amendments to the existing constitution or indeed draft a new one. But more crucially, they want the army to stay out of politics and indeed for the old guard, which has been ruling the country since the independence in 1962, to stand down. And this youth-driven movement, the so-called Revolution of Smiles, is effectively calling for an end to the deference towards authoritarian figures and especially the army. They're looking for Algeria to turn into a modern democracy where everybody, and especially young people, can have a stake in society and indeed in the economy. They effectively want a fair redistribution of Algeria's immense wealth, especially oil and gas revenues. So that's what effectively is at stake in these elections.
Are the people asking for too much too quickly, though, Nabila? Because, as you've hinted yourself, since 1962 and independence, Algeria has practically been a one-party state with the National Liberation Front continually controlling the country in terms of who's been the president. Are the people on the streets not asking for too much change too quickly? Are they really expecting it to happen right now?
Well, absolutely, especially since, as I said, it's a very youthful population. The army has tried, to use the election to restore order and indeed to revive memories of the country's war of independence against the French, or indeed the decade-long civil war during the 90s. But most of the people taking to the streets have no memories of these conflicts, and they want to be part of, as I said, a modern democracy. And that's why they very much want to have a say and indeed a stake in society. But they also, have been taking part in peaceful demonstrations so far. But this peace is by no means guaranteed, and the election could indeed act as a tipping point. And in fact, human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, for example, have already condemned the Algerian government and indeed security forces because of the deepening repression leading up to election day. So that's a concern that people have at the moment, maybe a return to violence. Another worrying factor in these elections is the absence of international observers, and people have also been quick to point out that the 5 candidates standing for elections are all Bouteflika loyalists. 2 of them include 2 former prime ministers, 2 others are 2 former ministers, and 1 standalone candidate, if you like, has created an independent political party, which is effectively an offshoot of the ruling FLN party. So protesters believe that the candidates standing are effectively representatives of the establishment, and they seek to maintain a system in place which will make sure that the profits from Algeria's vast resources will stay in the hands of a few.
Nabila, thank you so much indeed for your time. Nabila Ramdani speaking to us from London.